Hey everyone, it's George Couros. Welcome back to another episode of the Innovators Mindset Podcast. And I'm going to talk about this idea about the system. We always hear, well, the system was built for the results that it gets, or something like that. And I hear it so much. I asked ChatGPT for some comedic versions of this, and this is what it provided. The system is all about personalization as long as everyone does the same thing. The system supports innovation pending approval from 14 committees. We love meetings in education. The system loves innovation as long as it fits neatly into a 45-minute block. That last one, I'm going to really build some of the ideas. And I really want to give you some practical ideas because one of the things that I truly believe is the system, which is not the Wizard of Oz hiding behind a curtain. It is made up of people. The system is made up of people. And unless we challenge things or provide alternatives, we can sometimes cause more issues than we solve. The other part of this is in Innovate Inside the Box, the whole idea of the book was that we will always face constraints. Yes, there's some things that are out of your control that are really in the control of politicians. But there's a lot of things within our control. And sometimes we create boxes within boxes. I didn't know the name for this before, but the box inside a box is, I think it's like matryoshka dolls, those Russian dolls. And you open one and there's another one, there's another one, there's another one. And the big doll is the constraints that you have to work within. But do we create those little, dolls inside? Terrible analogy maybe. But I want you to really think about one in particular. I work with a lot of school districts, and what they'll often say is things like this. Oh, we are in such a testing culture. We have such a testing culture. We over-test in education. And in states and provinces, the reality of it is most of you have to deal with standardized testing. That's true. That is a true thing. But is the testing culture because you have a standardized test or because you do all these practice tests towards doing well on the standardized test? And in Innovator's Mindset, I wrote this quote about this idea, and it's one of my favorite little sayings. And I'll share it at the end. It said, if we are still focused on solely doing well in standardized exams, then preparing students to be successful in the world today and in their future isn't really our chief concern. This is not to say that tests are relevant, but a testing culture is. As the old saying goes, you do not fatten a pig by weighing it. I don't know who said that. It's, just a saying that's been out there forever, but I love it. The thing with testing, I'm not really against tests. I know maybe I shouldn't say that. Maybe that's a bad thing to say, but I am against just testing and testing and testing and testing and practice tests to get prepared for the test. My belief is really if you develop great learners, they'll be fine on a test. But if you develop students who are really good at taking tests but don't know how to learn, they're going to be in big trouble once they leave school. That's something that I really think about. So sometimes we create some of the constraints within the constraints that we have to deal with because we're trying to appease to the constraints. So that's something I kind of want you to think about. Where are some of those constraints that maybe you are creating in your process as well? We don't even necessarily notice this all the time. That's why I think it's important to bring it up. We just kind of do things on default, just muscle memory, and we don't even question why we're doing them. When I worked for Kelly Wilkins, she is my favorite principal of all time. She just thought very differently, and it really changed a lot of who I am today and the way that I think about education. I came to her school. She was the principal at the time. And I had half-time middle school classes. And then the other half, I was supposed to work with teachers implementing technology. And so she gave me a schedule right when I came there. I had maybe been under contract for a day. And I looked at the schedule, and it really didn't make sense to me. I understood why she did it, but it really didn't make sense. The thing was, she wanted me to integrate technology in meaningful ways. So she had me on schedule working with every single teacher for a 45-minute block in their classroom once a week. My first thought was, we're not going to be really doing anything in depth because there's just not enough time to go deep into anything. And what I expect from a lot of the teachers that are on staff, and I didn't meet them, but I just know how it often works, is they would have me come in and do like a tech lesson for 45 minutes, and then I'd be on my way, and they would maybe use it as, a prep to catch up on grading, things like that. So it's something sat with me, and I just knew Kelly well enough that I could maybe say something and we can perhaps go in a different direction. So I brought up the concern that I had that it's just going to have me just kind of rotating, just doing tech lessons, but nothing really meaningful through the process. So when I showed her the schedule and I shared my concern, one of the things that really stuck out to me was she said, well, what would you do? My first thought was, why are you asking me? I'm just a teacher. That's not really my place. And I even said that out loud. This is not my place to make the decision. But she kind of corrected me when she said, it is your place. That is why we hired you. You're the expert in technology. That's why we brought you in. So for me to tell you how to do it when you have a concern, give me a different solution. Give me some different ideas. So I'm thinking, wow, that's rude. Why do I have to do this? All joking aside. But it just kind of took me back because I wasn't used to that. The thing with Kelly that was really good and really stuck out to me, if you came to her with a problem, she would ask you for the solution. She wasn't there to fix your problems. You could vent to her, you could share them, but she would ask you, what do you think you should do? What do you think you should do? So now there's much more ownership over this process. So she sends me away and she said, bring me back some ideas. So I'm looking at the schedule, thinking about my time. One of the things that I said to Kelly when I came back was, and I thought she would never go for it, was I want to really do some things in depth that are really connected to the curriculum and what the teachers are currently doing. So could I work for perhaps with a teacher in their class over a 2-week period and work with them, help them develop some of their curriculum, see where technology can be integrated. And we just don't want to put it in just to put it in. So that would be a conversation that we would have with the teacher, and we could create something really meaningful while also helping the teacher develop some skills, because now it's not just a 45-minute block where I'm covering someone. It is a co-teaching classroom where we're having conversations and kind of digging into why we're doing what we're doing. And she said, that's great. Let's try it out. Let's see what happens. I'm thinking, really? That's so weird. The constraint that we had in the school was I had a certain amount of time that I had allocated. So yes, I had to teach math second period every single day. I get that. But there's times in the afternoon where it's tech and I'm supposed to go class to class. But she said, yeah, just work with the teacher during that time and rotate. We want every teacher to get equal time throughout the year. And now she knew that wouldn't happen that way, because I'm not marking on a calendar or punching a card, but it would be as close as possible. But it's really looking at the curriculum, connecting it in a meaningful way. And just to make sure that I spent time with every single teacher. And she gave me a ton of flexibility to really kind of create that process. And it was just something that was interesting because I wasn't used to someone thinking differently, because again, the constraint was the time, but what we did in the time really changed. So I wrote this email talking about some of the things that I had shared, and it's 3 ways to change the system from within. And you can actually see the link in the notes below. And I want to give you some meaningful examples on how I actually do this. So here's the first one. Kind of going back to what I did with Kelly. So as a school principal, and maybe I should be saying this, but I'm not a principal anymore, so can't really get in trouble. But when I was a school principal, my superintendent had asked me, and the amazing thing, Kelly was my deputy superintendent, so I knew she'd be good with this. She asked me for instructional minutes for every single teacher. So we had to do this to, comply with the province. How many you have to teach language arts a certain amount of minutes a week, you have to teach math a certain amount of minutes a week, et cetera. And I should correct myself. You have to teach it a certain amount of time a year divided by the number of weeks that we were in school. So we go through that process and we would actually develop that time and go through it. And so I asked my teachers, hey, listen, I want you to look at when your phys ed schedule is, when your music schedule is, and I want you to write this amount of times of language arts, this amount of time of science, this time of math, et cetera. But that being said, I want you to understand this. If you have science and then math, but you're really into a science lesson, I don't want you just to stop it because it's math time. And in all honesty, if you want to really dive deep into a science unit over the next 2 weeks and not teach math during that period, that's totally fine. Now, there's some things that I would say should be taught every day. Kids should be reading every single day. Kids should be doing phys ed every single day. But there's some flexibility in the project that we're doing. Now, I needed that sheet to give to the province if anyone came in, et cetera. No one comes in. But as long as we're teaching the curriculum, what we're expected to teach, and again, we're teaching the minutes within the year. Now, the second example I wanted to provide is kind of based on what we did with our students and the instructional minutes. This was something that I wanted to kind of implement as a principal. And the reality of this is we were doing digital portfolios in our schools. What we were doing in that process, we wanted our teachers to each have their own digital portfolio so they could teach the students, because how can you really teach something you had never learned yourself? And I didn't share this in the email, so it's a little bonus. This is why I do the podcast. We were doing teacher evaluations a certain way, and this is going to be part of the teacher evaluation. But what I explicitly said to my staff was, hey, we're going to do this digital portfolio process, and this is going to be part of your evaluation. But because of that, here's something we are no longer doing. If you add to the plate, it is so essential that you get rid of something. You can't just keep adding. And it's not about adding stuff on, but how to use your time in a different manner. So with that being said, and going through the process, one of the things that I did as a principal, we had a day allocated for professional learning. We used to mess with these times in so many different ways. I could talk about this forever. We were expected, again, as my superintendent, the expectation as a principal was basically it was like 8 to 3:30. And you had to plan, you get an hour for lunch, breaks, etc. So on this one day in particular, the staff showed up at 8:30 to 9:30 or 10 o'clock. Basically, I would teach them how to create a digital portfolio. This is a brand new thing they had never done before. So it's really important that I actually taught them the skills with this. Now, during that time, what I said, I taught them, went through the process. Then this is what I said. So we have basically 10 a.m. and we have to be here till like 3:30 today. So here's what I'm going to ask you to do. Between 10 and 2:30, I want you to go off. You can go to Starbucks, you can go to a restaurant, you can do it by yourself, you can do it with your friends. I don't really care, but each one of you has to write one entry now into your portfolio that you created today. So you actually have to, and share a practice, share what you're doing, kind of go through that process and have some of that time for reflection. Now, I don't care where you do it or how you do it. I just need it done by 2:30, because at 2:30, we're going to come back and read each other. So I built an accountability through the process, because it's like, hey, we're going to see what each other did. And one of the things I really wanted to do was expose what was happening in each teacher's classroom so they could learn from each other. Now, we did that, came back at 2:30. As I said, the time was built in. Now, I will be totally honest with you. There's no way it's going to take them 4.5 hours to do one post. There's no way. It might take some people an hour. It might even take some people 2 hours. But what's the worst case scenario that they would actually not need all that time? They might start planning their classrooms. They might, God forbid, teachers have time to plan for their classrooms on a PD day. So I knew some people need more time, some people take less time, and they would just do this. So we would come back 2:30. It was amazing. One of the reasons I did that, because if they saw value in it for themselves, they're more likely to really buy into it and get involved in that process for their students, and they'd have some ownership. That's the most important thing, because they saw it as value to them. I got pushed back on this from my superintendent. It wasn't Kelly, it was a different one. And he had a concern because teachers were kind of going off. There's some chaos in his mind on how we're doing this. So when I pushed back a little bit, I said, here's what the perspective I have. If you took every school in the district that had the 8 to 3:30 day, what can you prove of their learning? You can prove they were there. You might be able to say this is when they went for lunch, whatever. But with me, I can point to every single teacher having evidence of learning and sharing it with each other. You can read in a blog post. Just because you sit in a room doesn't mean you actually learn anything. And he was like, huh, that's kind of interesting. So I got more flexibility to do stuff through that process. And that was really helpful. And this actually leads to the last one. And it kind of connected to the first two as well. You probably know what deer time is, or you have a version of it. Canada, we call it, drop everything and read, sustained silent reading. You got 50 minutes. Kids can just read whatever they want. And what I love is that a lot of teachers will actually have their own book and they'll read in front of their kids, because what great modeling you have through that process. So I wrote about a variation of this in the innovator's mindset, and I share this. In education, how often do we actually build in reflection to our learning? We have a lot of schools that do variations of drop everything and read, a concept that encourages students to read and consume information, but few schools focus on encouraging students or educators to drop everything and reflect. How might we all be impacted if we took time out of each day to think about what we have learned and how it impacts our next steps? So if you can read in front of the kids because it's good at modeling, why wouldn't you write? So one of the teachers I worked with, she had this great idea. She would do these blog buddies once a week, and basically we'd allocate about an hour of the time because, hey, we want teachers, writing in their portfolios, sharing some of their ideas, but do we really want them doing after school? We have very busy lives, and I don't want to take that away from a teacher. So she had students doing this, but she also would write in her own blog during that time to share what she was doing, because if you can model reading, why can't you model writing? So she's doing this within the school day where she's doing something, she's getting better at it, she's have a better understanding as a learner, but she's not necessarily going outside the constraints of the day. And that's something that really matters to me, is if it is important to you as an administrator, how do we make time for it in the professional learning day? And is there ways that we can actually do this where it really encourages deeper learning for our students, but we're learning in front of our kids as well? And that's just some of the ideas I have. I'd love to hear some of your ideas, like basically, how do you, within the constraints, there's a constraint, what is the constraint? How do you build within it? And I share this at the end of the email. There will always be issues in education, but if you see that the system, like the Wizard of Oz, is actually made up of people, you might have more opportunity to make things better than you give yourself credit. So just want to share some of those ideas with you. I hope this is helpful to you. I'd love to hear some of your solutions and how you do this. I hope you have a wonderful day. Thanks for all you do. Take care.